having potential customers as guests. So when I tried that approach, what I realized is that some of the guests are actually either not interested in passive investing at all because maybe putting their blinders on, believing their approach is the best. And I'm not trying to convince them otherwise in the podcast either because I felt like that would be too much of a hard sell.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster. It's your host, Adam Adams, and I'm joined with somebody who's in the real estate space who was referred to listening to our podcast a while back. They said, you should check out this podcast. He knows something about real estate, and he's now helping podcasters, and you want to start a podcast, and so I guess she's been a listener, which I just learned today. Micy Liu. Wait, say your last name. Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah, it's Liu.
Liu. All right. Liu. It's already in the show notes. Her bio's in the show notes. She barely launched her podcast, which is pretty awesome. It's called American Dream Builder and Investor. And one of the main things that she is achieving or wanting to achieve, because as we record, it's very, very new. There's only been 6 episodes out. It feels like she just launched last week. And so there's a lot going to happen. But a goal that she has with her podcast, here's a couple. A, how do we make the podcast completely sustainable on its own? Like, so it doesn't have to cost me money and take money out of my pocket. And B, what else do I need to do to make the podcast effective? So in her case, her client, the person she tries to attract, is actually a passive investor who invests alongside with the apartments that she purchases or the commercial real estate, the bigger units that she and her team purchase. And she's already got like 1,000 of these units as well. 1,000 rental units. And that might be, perhaps it could be one apartment with all 1,000, or it could be 10 apartments with 100 each, or some other mixture, but 1,000 units. And she's looking to kind of grow that with the podcast help, but also make sure the podcast is making its own money. She's got a couple of questions already ready. This is going to be one of those reverse interviews where Micy is going to interview me. She's going to ask me questions, and it's a free coaching call. She doesn't have to pay for. And you, the listener, have the opportunity to do one of these free coaching calls with me as well. So if you haven't launched it all, or if you're just brand new, like Micy has had hers a week as we are recording this, go ahead and schedule. You can ask any dang thing. And she's already got a couple of big questions she wants to ask. And so I'm going to turn it over to her and let her ask the first question.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, super big thing here. Another reason I wanted to have the podcast is to just have more reach in general as more of a personal brand, because I do believe there's a lot of opportunities to connect with people in different areas. So, but for now, I think it's important to stay focused. So I wanted to focus on passive investing, with the goal of helping people, especially busy professionals and who are first and second generation immigrants like me, which is my background, to achieve time, financial, and geography freedom, the trinity of freedom. It's been about almost a year since I've been thinking about launching the podcast and finally put the trigger on it. Just a little background. And I actually started recording probably in September. And I've actually had about maybe close to a dozen interview episodes recorded. And after I recorded them, right before we launched, I decided that I'm going to do some solo episodes as well, which it turned out to be a lot more difficult than I thought. But I wanted to do the interview podcast as well, which I have recorded. But as I was recording, I was learning about what I really wanted to talk about in this podcast. As I was recording, and I also, talked with different folks about my recording after they listened to it. One of the common thread is, seems like you're trying to talk about a lot of different things. In some of these episodes, I start with what's that person's cultural background, because a lot of times I interview people who are immigrants. They're passively investing or just investing in general, and they already achieved some level of freedom. And at the beginning of the episodes, I started with a lot more like, oh, so how did you come to the U.S.? What motivated you to come to the U.S.? What's your success so far? What's your success before real estate? And that ended up being like a large chunk. So I tried to reduce it later on when I realized that was an issue. But then on some of your podcasts, I listened about having potential customers as guests. So when I tried that approach, what I realized is that some of the guests are actually either not interested in passive investing at all, because maybe they're putting their blinders on, believing their approach is the best. And I'm not trying to convince them otherwise in the podcast either, because I felt like that would be too much of a hard sell. On the other side, I don't really want to keep releasing things that's just talking about like all their success story, but not so much on the investing piece, or investing piece being 10% of the podcast, which is kind of deviating from what I believe my podcast is about right now. So coming back, my two questions for you are, and I may have a few other as well. The first is, should I be interviewing people who are my potential customers? If so, what if they're not aware of their problem, or don't seem to have an interest in taking advantage of services of mine, or like mine, even though I believe there is a value for them? Are they the right guests? And then the second question is about like, what do I do with the episodes I already recorded with them if I don't believe it matches my theme as well?
This is good. So to start where we are here, she wanted to start a podcast a year ago. It took her a whole year to get started. You listening, learn from her mistake. Micy, I'm sorry to say that you had a mistake, but I want the listener to understand, if they already know that they want to have a podcast, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So don't wait another year before you even launch it. Go ahead and get it started. And if Grow Your Show can help you, just go to growyourshow.com and just schedule a discovery call with me, and you and I can kind of figure out how we could help you. Because I don't want you to have to wait a whole year, because your clients are just going to go to somebody else. And I'm happy Micy made it happen and she's here. One thing that's cool is it took her 2 months. She started already recording. And so she got like a dozen episodes ready. And that's a huge benefit, because now she's not behind the 8 ball. When she launches her podcast, she has already got a bank account with a good amount of these episodes ready to go that are in it. So she's ahead of the game instead of behind the 8 ball. So definitely take a good page out of her book as well for that foresight that she had. And then she's wondering, because she listens to this podcast, and you've heard me say a lot of times, if you listen to this show, you probably heard me many times say that it can be a real benefit for you to interview your own ideal avatar, the type of person you want to work with. Now, Micy's asking, like, how does that work with her audience? And so I'm going to have to extract some of this to kind of figure that out. But the first thing that I wanted to mention is just going back to something she said, where she said, I want to do potential clients as my guests, but they don't always, I think this is kind of like a paraphrase of what she said, they don't always, I can't really sell them on my podcast. Like while I'm interviewing them, it's not really appropriate or right, or doesn't maybe make sense for me to tell them that what they're already investing in is bad and they should start investing in apartments with me instead. It just doesn't seem to click. And so how do I do that? Who should I be interviewing? And just one piece of advice that I think that I have for you, Micy, and for the listener, it's an idea of BRT/match and mirror. And these are things that I learned when I did door-to-door sales. I did a mission for 2 years, knocking on doors, trying to convert people to a religion. I was selling home security, mortgages, door-to-door. Sales has been something that I've been a part of in and out for many years. And these two ideas that I learned are impactful, I think, for everybody. And the BRT means build a relationship of trust. And the matching and mirroring kind of starts by, and even repeating what they said, kind of helps you to be able to move somebody from where they are to where you want them to be. And if we are abrasive, it can be helpful for us to basically draw a line in the sand. Yes, it can be real helpful for you to draw a line in the sand and say, that's the bad way over there. This is the good way over here. And that's kind of, I think in a way, what Micy's saying is it's hard to kind of convert people. You attract more flies with honey than with vinegar. And so it's like telling them that they're wrong. It just didn't always make sense. And so these two ideas of BRT and match and mirroring and repeating what they last said can be real helpful on the podcast. So I want to think of it like slow play it, Micy. Don't expect to convert 100% of your guests anyway, whether you have them or not. Like don't expect to convert them immediately. On my podcast, I probably get 1 out of 6, 1 out of 5 that are interested, and 1 out of 3 of the interested ones that end up hiring us. So I will interview another podcaster, even kind of like this conversation that Micy and I are having. She's on the podcast. Maybe I'm not technically interviewing her. She's kind of asking me the questions, and I'm trying, it's like a coaching call, but same thing. 1 out of 6 Micys will say at the end of a call with me, I'm not going to ever be forceful or aggressive or really draw the line in the sand in a bad way, but it is highly probable, because 1 out of 6, that she might just want to do a discovery call after this, right? Micy might be like, oh yeah, hey, Adam, that was great. I liked it. You added value to me and my podcast. I want more. And how do we do that? And so there's a good chance. And then out of those 6-ish people, 1 in 6 people, 1 in 3 of them that has that discovery call will be like, all right, I have the money. I know you can help me. I'm ready to go and pay. And that's the same thing that I want to say for Micy today is like, for you, Micy, like, don't expect to convert every single person. It's not the point of it. And you attract more flies with honey than water. So you don't really need to tell them that they're doing something wrong or try to convert them right away. You kind of just need to be a light beacon, like a lighthouse that is shining the light. It's there. We all know it's there. Maybe we'll be looking at the water. Maybe we'll be looking at the shoreline. Maybe we'll be looking at the dock or other boats or the whales. But we know that the light is there turning, and we know that where the lighthouse is and how to find our destination, because it's standing there proud. It might be not screaming at us and selling us and, whatever, but it's there, and we know it's there, and we know what it stands for. So as you're interviewing people, just be who you are. That's A. But then also this matching and mirroring, repeating the last thing in like BRT. What I want to say with that is, when we would go into somebody's house, we would look around. We would see what they're interested in. We would look at their walls. We would look, oh, they went skydiving, and we want to go skydiving. So then we will use that piece of information, not against them. I don't want to make it sound like we're like having a fight against them, but I mean, we will use that information to support a relationship, to build a relationship of trust where we can align on something. So for example, you see that their kids went to a certain school. Your kids went to University of Utah? I'm from Utah. I love you. I follow them. Or, oh, you went skydiving? I went for my 40th birthday. What did you think of it? Were you scared? Are you going to go again? And so we take this piece of information that we know, and then we like build on it and have a relationship starting. So you've got somebody on. I want you to identify things that you guys have in common. Like, honestly, they're on there, and I want you to just point out a few things. That's really cool. So tell me more about that, and extract it, and then have that relatability. And that'll be one thing where they're thinking to themselves, she has things in common with me. She's interested in what I'm doing. Because she's interested in what I'm doing and what I've done or where I'm going or what I do, because I can tell that she likes that about me. I like her. Now I like her, and I'm similar to her. We are cut from the same cloth in a way. And when they start to feel like they're cut from the same cloth, it's much easier to sell to them. I'm air quoting sale because it's, maybe it's not like a sell, but once you and your guest or whomever are relating and have those things in common and have interest in each other, it's much more comfortable for them to want to hire you as a consultant, to want to invest alongside with you because they're like you. One quick example of that is when I posted some stuff about me mountain biking. There's a lot. I was doing syndication as well as I was raising capital. And I stopped posting about my business, and I started just posting about my family, the food that I ate, what I do with my kids, going to CrossFit today. It's Wednesday. I record on Wednesdays, and we have private lessons for CrossFit every single Wednesday. And I post some of this stuff, my mountain biking. And I actually got 2 people, which is kind of cool, that decided that they're going to invest with my company because I mountain bike. It's the silliest thing, but that comes to building a relationship of trust, having things in common. And both gentlemen, both of them guys, he said, Adam, I follow you on social. I see that you do mountain biking. I love mountain biking. And then they said, I could invest my money with anyone out there. And what they said, and I'm not saying this is necessarily true, but what they said is all of you are the same. You have about the same amount of return. You have underwrite about the same way. Like to them, in their own perspective, all of the syndicators were the same. All of the coaches were the same. All of the life coaches, the mentors, the physical coaches, the nutrition coaches, whoever you are listening and what you do, you got that person thinking, oh, they're all the same. They all teach me macros. They all teach me exercise. They all teach me whatever. But then they're going to say, but who am I similar to? And so these two guys, the weirdest thing, they decided to put $100,000 with me each, or maybe one of them was like 50, but one of them wanted to put $100,000 with me instead of all of these other people that were also good, just simply because I mountain biked. And he only knew that I mountain biked because I did that BRT and we had that. Okay, now let's talk about what is matching and mirroring. Matching and mirroring would basically be, you're not going to get it's not going to be easy for you, Micy, to take somebody from loving the stock market, for example, to investing with you if you are different from them. If you're saying, you're this type of person, I'm this type of person, then they're going to be like, yeah, she doesn't even get me. She doesn't understand me. I've been making money in my stock market. They might say, I've been doing this for 30 years and now I've got like $1 million there or $500,000 or any other number. And so who is she to tell me that this doesn't work? Right. Mm-hmm. But if as we're interviewing that person, we got to find a way to relate to them by saying something like, oh, that's great that you do the stock market. How long have you been doing that? And start to show the benefit of what they're already doing. And in a very gentle, careful way, you can say that you might want to diversify that. You might want to diversify it because not sure if the stock market is always going to go up, and maybe there's other things, other ways for you to make sure that you're making that money. I might suggest doing something that I do. I also do apartment syndication, for example, or I also do this. And you just say, like, we found some pretty strong returns with some great collateral and very, very steady. And as you share this, it can help them decide, maybe I should put a little bit of my money there. But you kind of got to like complement what they're already doing instead of dismiss what they're already doing. What you're doing, because then now we're in an argument. Now we're in a place where we don't see eye to eye. You got to start by matching what they're doing, mirroring how they are, what they're talking about, how they feel about something. Let them be excited about the stock market that they're already doing, and let them know that they could also do these other things too. Using the last few words, some people call it the last 3 words. So tell me what you had for breakfast, Micy, and I'll use these last 3 words against you somehow.
Banana nut bread, I think.
All right. So you only said 3 words. So I will just repeat all of the words this time. What I would say is banana nut bread. So I'd repeat the last 3 words. And I'd say banana nut bread. I love banana nut bread. Was it with walnuts, I assume, or something else?
Yeah, it was. I just had it with water. I don't remember what's in the nut. I think it's walnut. But okay. Coming back to the question, do you ask this before the interview just to get kind of establish a relationship? Or do you actually talk through this in the recording as well? Because depending on that person's interaction, obviously, if we feel like it doesn't go with the flow, we can edit it out. But sometimes, it's hard to really know how they're going to interact. And I don't necessarily want every episode to be like, oh, passive investing is the holy grail. And the truth is there's many other alternative investments, just investing instruments out there. It kind of all works in together depending on that person. But I don't necessarily want to be doing an episode on be like, hey, stock investing is awesome. And then that's what the whole episode is about. When I want to talk about more about passive investing in real estate, more of those recession and inflation resistant assets.
Yeah.
Can we dive a little bit more into that?
Just so one of the questions is, do we do this before the interview? Do we do it during the interview? Do it after? I would say that every time that it comes up where they mention something, we should always be thinking, can I relate to that? Or maybe we should think instead of can I, but how can I relate to that? They just told me this thing. How can I find a way to kind of like be there with them, match with them, and show this? And she's also thinking like, I'm not trying to have this interview all about how great stocks are. I'm not trying to have that. We're trying to teach something different, and for a good reason, because these alternative assets can be a huge benefit for people. And my business is all about alternative assets. And so my best answer here is you should do it before, during, and after. Beforehand, you should do it, but it's just any time that they bring something up that you can relate and connect. And that's one of the best ways to have some really good energy on your interview, because it's like, oh, this person, we are like the same person. And then the rest of the interview is going to go great. You should definitely even do it during. So they mention something, and frequently you want to be able to kind of show that you relate. But I think most especially, I mean, all of the places, yes, before and during for sure, but also after. After meaning you've had the interview, you reach back out to them. Wow, this was so great. Thank you for being part of the episode. And I love that you said this, this, and this. How is that going for you? And you start to have a real relationship with them. And later on, you can say, hey, would you like me to show, I know you say something like this. Hey, I know you're loving the stock market. I remember you talking about that. And out of curiosity, we do have some deals that are probably going to be coming up in the next few months. Do you want me to show you any of the alternative assets, or do you just want to stay doing what you're doing and only do that and not diversify? And the way that I say that, they're like, they would probably think, man, it's not bad for me to look at it. Diversification doesn't sound bad. I've heard that that was good. And so they're basically going to sell themselves and say, yeah, I guess you can share it with me. And now you might not have an actual investor in each individual, but maybe 1 out of 6, maybe 1 out of 3 of those people that you interview and you talk to after and say, I know that you got this going on. Would you like me to share with you some of this? Or are you not even interested in diversification or having another form? And 1 out of 3 might say yes. All right, let me back up because we've probably got most of that. So when I invite potential guests, people are not aware of their problem or do not seem to have interest in my service. She's basically saying, should I interview guests? And I said, I'm going to have to ask her some questions. Or she said, should I interview guests that are, and I should finish the sentence, guests that are my potential client. So if that's the case, Micy, I'm going to ask you, who would be that ideal client and what questions do you think you would ask them? Like that ideal investor in your case. And what do you think you would ask them?
Yeah, my ideal investor is a senior tech professional or tech executives or executives in general, and they're likely first and second generation immigrants like me, although it doesn't have to be, and I've worked with customers who are not. And the questions I would ask would be, what are you wanting to achieve with freedom? Why is that important to you? And what are you doing financially for those freedom? Is that actual true freedom because it's passive income? How are you balancing your risks while getting those freedom? Along those lines, just to understand where they're at and where they want to go and if it's a good fit. Because as you know, for someone who's making less than 6 figures, typically, they're likely not our ideal clients. They're just because of the amount that's required for investing.
Yeah. So just to be clear, this is somebody who resonates with you. They might be a first or second generation immigrant. They resonate with you. They make good money, at least 100, at least six figures. And it sounds like they have never invested in alternative assets. It sounds like that. Is that true?
Yeah, it could be. I realized that a lot of my customers, there's more than 50% of them, they're investing their first time with me. There's that component of it. Obviously, it's harder to convert when the awareness level is lower, but I do get to develop a deeper connection with them and help them along the process. There is another type of customers I could interview is people who are already experienced in passive investing, but they just haven't maybe been exposed to me and my story and how we do things.
Yep.
That could be as well.
Okay. Yeah. So what I started doing on my real estate podcast, I sold it like over 3.5 years ago, almost 4. Geez, that's crazy to think. Almost 4 years ago. What I would do is I would actually interview people that were already passive investing. And I think in your case, Micy, this is probably going to be better for you because they're already interested. They already do it. They already have the money. They already have some idea. And then you convert them from investing with multiple people or just the one person to also adding you or switching to you. And you do that by BRTing, matching and mirroring, being relatable, and definitely showing them what you do that's different. So I feel strongly that in your specific case, that it's probably going to be better for you to interview somebody who's already passively investing. And here's a couple of reasons why. Your listener is going to probably get more value. So you ask, why do you passively invest? What made you start to passively invest? What are the successes? What held you back? And this all helps you to be able to just know your avatar better. Like you just know who that next passive investor is a little bit better because you're asking somebody like them these questions, like what held you back? Why did it take you so long? Like, for example, I now know that it took you a year to get your podcast started. That I could probably use that information later with talking about, man, do you need any help or something? And I know it took you a year long to kind of get there. How are you doing with it? Is there anything we can do? But I can feed back the information that I already know. Same thing. You say, what markets do you invest in? How come? How do you pick a market? And you're asking the passive investor. It's all adding value to a future passive investor, all of it. But also you're getting to know that human, and you're also getting to know how the other avatar will probably be thinking about stuff. But you're learning that this person only invests in Texas, for example. Then later on, you can throw the information back to them and say, that's great that you invest in DFW. It's one of my favorite markets. I think it's one of the strongest markets in the country. We're investing in 3 markets right now, and DFW is one of the big ones that we want to be a part of. It's hard to find great deals there, but if we do find a great deal in DFW, do you want me to let you know about it? And boom, now you've switched it from just knowing this information just because you asked them to now asking for the sale, asking them to consider investing with you if you've got a deal. And
definitely.
Yeah. So
I think that could be a great approach. Now, follow-up question is there's different levels of passive investors as well. You got people who's investing in 30 to 100 syndications. So you got people who just started with their step one. Obviously, everyone's journey is a little different. And I think listeners can benefit from all of them. There's 2 types of existing passive investors. I don't exactly know how to deal with. One is some of them, they may not feel they're qualified to talk, even though they have some experience already. But the second one is I don't know how to deal with a situation where they're not as experienced to maybe say something that's either obviously wrong because they're not doing this actively, or they say something I don't completely agree with. I don't know how to approach those situations as well without sound like I'm bashing them or like, hey, you're wrong. And I don't usually say that either. I just say, that's interesting. Here's my perspective. But if I do believe their information is wrong, I could cut it out, but how do I approach that respectfully?
Yeah. I have noticed, and this is another sales strategy, it's called Feel, Felt, Found. Feel, Felt, Found is really good to overcome somebody's objection. And it seems also really good to sway somebody from what they think now to what you want them to think. And what I want to share, what could possibly be one of the things that help you with this, you've got some investors that feel like they're not qualified, and you've got other investors that might say wrong things on the podcast or things that you disagree with. How do you deal with the second? And then we'll talk about the first, hopefully in a sec. Give me one example, even if you make it up, Micy. Even if you make up the example, still, can I just have an example of something that somebody may have said when being interviewed on your podcast that was out of alignment with your belief system? So then we can talk about how we could address that thing.
Sure. For example, there's an investor, he talked about how currently the economic cycles are as bad as 2008, 2009. And I may not agree with that. And I pointed out some of the differences, and then he followed up, and it was okay. He followed up with his facts, and I kind of talked about mine. We kind of moved on to another topic, just, sharing perspectives. I think some of the other ones that I have a harder time with is where people are maybe purchasing their single family home. They're spending a lot of time doing tenants and toilets. They still didn't necessarily happy on my episode, but it was more of a normal conversation. But I can feel how much stress is under doing all of that. And I can feel it when he's talking and all that, but he still believes, that's the way he needs to do it. And let me just stay, because I can't think of two things at once. It's too hard. So I want to hit on the first one that you mentioned, and then maybe we can hit the other one if it doesn't answer your question. And the first one was the 2008 economy issue, this disagreement that you may have had with somebody that was on your show. And you're not trying to tell people that now is a bad time to invest, because you feel like now is a good time to invest, and that there are some metrics that support that theory, that idea. And so then you've got somebody that comes on and they've got it in their head that, oh, this is happening, this inflation, this thing, this, and you're like, but it's not the same. And so a way to approach this might be like two ways. One is feel, felt, found, and the other is to record a solo episode about it. The second way is a way that I've done 3 or 4 times. So somebody says, oh, I love my Blue Yeti microphone. And I actually hate the Blue Yeti. I think the Blue Yeti is the worst, right? And so they come on and they're like, oh, yeah, I got this awesome mic. It's a Blue Yeti. And then I would just say, I'll say, hey, I'm really glad that you like the Blue Yeti. That's awesome. I feel like there's some really good mics out there that are better and for less. And I want the listener to know that. So I'm not going to try to say, go and buy the Blue Yeti. I'm trying to say, stay after this episode and just listen to the very next episode. It's going to be a solo episode. And I'm going to just talk about some mics that are really, really good, that I love, that are going to save you a ton of money from the Blue Yeti, but also make a really good sound quality. So stay on for that. And we'll finish this interview. But when it's done, I want you to get that, especially if you're trying to think about a microphone to buy. And now I've just pointed out something, like I've done it fairly tactfully in this case, fairly tactfully. And what another benefit is that I don't have my guest backing up why they have the Blue Yeti. All of the, oh no, this has 79 5-star reviews, or 7,999 5-star reviews, or, oh no, when I type in best podcast mic, it's what comes up on Google immediately. So the proof in the pudding, Adam. And now all of a sudden, now my listener's like, okay, maybe Adam doesn't actually know what he's talking about, because this guy's got some, or gal has got some real facts behind what they're doing that's different. Same thing with you. 2008 economy issue disagreement. You rebuttal, you say, no, actually, today it is a good time because of this, this, and this. And then he's like, no, actually, it's not because of this, this, and this. And now your listeners thinking to themselves, wait, maybe I shouldn't be investing with Micy if she doesn't know all those things, because we allowed him the opportunity to rebuttal. And sometimes the rebuttal is meant for really healthy discussion. And other times we can realize that it can confuse our listener or take away some of our credibility. And so you might do it like this. You might do it like, Mike, I want to acknowledge that you are uncertain about the market right now. I want to do for the listener,
who's either uncertain or not sure what to believe, I just want to do a solo episode that I can pour into you, the listener, where I want to talk about the market. I want to talk about the pros, the cons, what you should be looking at, what you should be seeing. And if we've got the same things happening now as we did in 2008 or not. So don't go anywhere. At the end of this episode, the next episode is going to be a solo episode. I'm just going to pour into you. So Mike, thank you again for joining me. Thank you for sharing your feedback on what you think is going on with the market, how you feel about that. Let's go to this question. Blah, 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 blah. And now you have never given Mike a chance to prove to you all the things that he's gotten. I don't even know if the guy's name is Mike. I hope it's not. But anyway, and your listener can hear you as the expert on the next episode, explaining what's different and what's not, what the pros are and what the cons are. And you don't have to be flustered. This part's important because especially for Adam Adams, and I think a lot of people, when we get emotional, when we have that flustered in us, when we have that disagreement, we don't think as clearly. We don't, unfortunately, maybe Micy's different, but the rest of us, like, we come from an emotional place and we forget the data. We forget the important stuff, and the conversation or the argument sometimes goes nowhere, sometimes. And so for us to just say, thank you for sharing your feeling on that and what some of the things that you're seeing. I want to really give the listener some real value on this now that they're hearing you say that, where I'm just going to take some time to record a podcast that's going to come out right after this with the pros and the cons and how they should be thinking of it. They don't want to miss it. I'll see you on that episode. And then you end the record. You make a note that you're going to do that.
Yeah,
you
that
end
makes
the
sense.
You end the recording, and then you write down the pros, the cons, anything that they said that you could rebuttal in by yourself, anything that they had said, like inflation. He probably said something about inflation, 80% sure. And so then you record this other one that says, in the last episode, it inspired me to record this for you because there's some bad information going out there. People are thinking about this thing about inflation and they're thinking that it means this and this and this. But let's get down to the real basics of what makes apartment investing good or bad. Mm-hmm. A, it's supply and demand. This is the biggest thing. And in my entrepreneurship class that I took way back in 2007, I'm dating myself, and I was taking this entrepreneurship class trying to graduate college. One of the big things that my teacher said there is it's all about supply and demand. It's the number one thing. It was the first lesson that we learned. And right now, unfortunately, and it's real sad that this is the case, we cannot build apartments fast enough, which means that there is a ton of demand for apartments, but we don't have enough units available, which means that the rents are going to increase, that they're going to build more apartments, that we need these, that people are still having more babies, that this and this and this, which just shows that by being involved in apartments right now, it's one of the best times that you can because of supply and demand. And then you just
understand.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. If I can just ask one last follow-up question. It's more about what about the episodes I recorded that's with people who are really ideal. Then they're not passive investors already, and they're kind of focused on their specific investing approaches. That's far away from what I believe is the right approach. And then record episodes with them. What should I do about those?
So there's a couple of concerns. One of the concerns is we've spent the time recording this episode. And another one is this guest expects that it's going to be published. I don't want to waste my time, and I don't want to disappoint my guest. Is that correct?
I mean, time is already wasted on that at this point. From that perspective, I'm sure it can be valid adding some other perspective, but it's more about the guest expectations, I think. Yeah. And one of them, they talked about how their investment strategy was so good, but it just doesn't align with your goals for the podcast and your business, right? Yes, it And it's mostly because as I started recording more, I figured, I really shouldn't be focusing on so much on their backstory, more focused a little more on investing, or their backstory as sprinkles on the cake, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be tough because it is either going to have you disappoint somebody and waste that time also, or you're going to have to maybe put extra time and effort into it. And so here's a couple of ideas. You got this recording. It was with Carl Edmonds. I'm making up a random name. Carl Edmonds was on your podcast, and he's second generation immigrant from who knows, who cares, but that place. And what he's investing in, he gave you his whole backstory. He told you what he was investing in. It had nothing to do with what you're wanting to achieve. And at the end of the day, you're not sure if you can use it. What I would do, takes extra time, is I'd probably listen to the whole episode with Carl. I'd probably take notes. When I'm listening to it, I'd try to timestamp like any clips. And then rather than having the whole episode, you could just talk about how, hey, I had a really great conversation with the gentleman who you might relate to. And his name was Carl. And I'm going to share 2 excerpts from that conversation. I think the conversation lasts about 36 minutes. These 2 excerpts are going to be about 4 minutes of that 36-minute time. And it's just that conversation that he and I had. It was a great conversation. I'm glad I got to meet him. I don't think that for this podcast that I asked all the right questions for the whole episode to be shared. You want to say it like that, Micy? I don't think I asked all the right questions for the whole episode to be shared. Carl's going to listen to it. And if he's going to think you're so rude if you're like, Carl just didn't get it. Carl just said all the wrong things. Carl just doesn't agree with me, so I'm not going to share it. If you just say, I didn't ask all the right questions to I was learning. It was in the beginning. I mean, there's these 2 excerpts that I think you're going to really gain some stuff from. But since I didn't ask all the right questions, I think I wasted time in places that aren't going to add that much value. I took these 2 parts, and I think you're going to like them. And one of the parts might be where Carl disagrees with you. Maybe one of the parts is like, so Carl was probably very similar to you, your listener, okay? Carl was very similar to you. Listen to what he's talking about right here. And then you play it. And then you hear him saying something like, yeah, I would never invest in syndication. I'm afraid of syndication. I even was interested in it, but my CPA told me not to do it. He told me to run, told me that it was dangerous, that it wasn't as safe as a stock market. It was risky. It was whatever word that he uses. And you go ahead and play that. But then you use feel, felt, found. So you're like, I know how Carl feels right now. He's heard this from this person. He's heard this from this person. He's heard this from this person. He's had this experience. One of his friends lost money somehow. It's valid for him to come from that place. It's valid for him to have this thought of, this is the best way. This is the way my financial advisor told me. It's very valid. So you want to acknowledge it. I know how he feels. I know how you feel. If you're going through what Carl was, I get it. I've been there before. I know how you feel. I know how he feels. And then you go, felt. Then you say something like, I felt the same way. Or you say something like, this other investor that's investing with me now, his name is John Anderson. John Anderson has recently put $500,000 with me. In the last 2 deals out of the 1,000 units that I already own, he's put over $500,000 or any other number. And John used to feel the same way Carl was feeling. John thought that this. John's advisor told him this. John saw this. John's had a friend like this. But he took the advantage. He took the initiative. He took control. He decided to do something. And what he found was, so I know how you feel. I felt the same way. I know how you feel. John felt the same way. And then what John found is that he's actually making more as a passive investor with our syndication than he was in the stock market. He's actually has found that it is safer for him. He's actually found that it grows slow and steady instead of goes up and then down and then up and then down. And for John, my investor, John, who's put $500,000 with us, right now, what he's thinking is he wants to try to take some more of the money away from what's already in the stocks, which is kind of surprising. He never expected to do that. He never thought that he would. He thought he would just dabble a little bit with here, but now he's liking it so much that he's finding that he's going to take maybe another $100,000 out of his stock market portfolio and move it into 2 of our deals just at the minimum of $50,000 each. And so now you've used that clip and you've used the value, and hopefully you've never, I don't remember, Carl, I don't think we've hurt Carl's feelings for this recording. And then you use another one, maybe like a positive one. And I really loved this thing that Carl said about his family. This was just a superb part. How he thinks that family is the most important, how he thinks this. I'm going to play you the clip right now. And then now you hear Carl talking about like family. You hear him talking about spending time with his wife, making sure date nights for his daughters, making sure that he goes to the soccer games or whatever. I really love this about him. I really think that this is a thing that all of us can learn from, all of us can gain from, and I wanted to share it with you. So you've got kind of like both of these clips, if there was any, and then you play it, and then you relate it to the listener, and then you let him know, hey, you say you've got to put the fault on you. You have to. Hey, Carl, that was a wonderful conversation. I gained so much. What happened is I was a brand new host and I wasn't asking all the right questions. And so I took 2 excerpts from that and I made a podcast out of it. And I want you to listen to it. I'm going to share it with you so you can share it with your friends, your family, your followers on social. And so now Carl's still getting highlighted and you're still getting good value to your listener. And all of the pieces seem to fit if you can spend that extra time.
Thank you. That's going to be super helpful, even though it's going to take extra time. And should I do the positive episode clip first or later?
I think you're onto something, and I was going to mention that as well. You're right. I think you should do the positive first.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is because BRT, show the things that you relate, show the positive thing that they're doing that's a good takeaway. And then if there's something that needs to be rebutted, then I'll do that second because it's still that feel, felt, found. It's acknowledging that you know where they are, that they can relate to you, and then anything new that you say can help you. I always do that with clients or potential clients. Like I'll do a discovery call with somebody who might want to work with us, but they say something and I have to acknowledge it. I have to be like, I hear you saying this. I hear you feeling this. I get it. And then once you've kind of shown that you get them, now it's time you can take them almost wherever you want to go. So do it that way in interviews, do it in conversations with your client, with your investor, but also do that with which one you put first, the negative or the positive. I would probably say the negative. Or if you could sandwich it, people have learned, go positive, negative, positive. If there's 3, you would start on a good note, give the lesson, and then end on another good note if you can.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Micy. If you need anything, let me know. And to the listener, the next episode is a solo episode with you and me. And I don't want you to miss it. I don't want you to miss out on the value that I prepared for you. So don't go anywhere. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now. If you're glad that you checked out the podcast today, if you got some value out of this episode, some actionable takeaways, I invite you to do one of 3 things. A, you could do a written review on Apple. Let us know what you think. Just an honest written review. B, you could share the podcast with a friend of yours who needs it. Or C, at the very least, implement what you've learned to take your business and your podcast to the next level. And I'll see you on the next episode.